Okay, let's talk about climate change, right? The Group CEO of the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, Dr. Edward Mungai, we spoke with him a couple of weeks back, and he's back because there is a report that they've released, The Landscape of Climate Finance in Kenya. And this is a report that's out there. So we want to understand, so that's first of all, landscape, climate finance, Kenya.
You know, you get the impression that you can't have a conversation in this day and age without talking environment, climate, greenhouse effect. I mean, somewhere along the line. So if I'm late to work, I can say, it was a greenhouse effect.
I thought you were going to say the climate.
Yes. Or if I want a bank loan, they don't give it to me, I say, no, it's climate change.
It's climate change.
Yes.
Things are changing.
Yes.
Dr. Mungai, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me again.
Good to have you. So this report, before we even go into the report, let's just start with the terminologies. What is climate finance?
Well, this is a way that we finance projects in the sense that they respect climate change. And respecting climate change here means that you're looking both at adaptation, but also mitigation. And I like what Mungai is talking there, that when you go to the banks, you tell them about climate change and they will finance you. This is the kind of financing, and we have seen more and more banks in Kenya, as the report says, really willing to provide financing to people who are implementing projects looking at climate change angle and ensuring that we have a better planet.
So projects such as planting trees.
Could
looking
be, and
at
that
energy efficiency.
Not just energy, sustainable energy, clean energy.
Clean energy.
Yeah, when you bring in that language, yes.
Best out us. Okay, and now this report that you released, Dr. Mungai, the Climate Finance in Kenya report, what is the background of this report?
Well, first of all, is also, to acknowledge, first of all, the donors who funded this, which is the German government. But more importantly, also to say that, Kenya in 2015 signed what is called the climate agreement in Paris. And within that agreement, Kenya really specified that they were going to cut emissions by about 30%. Now, subsequently, last December, the government of Kenya, obviously being a very progressive government as far as climate change is concerned, upgraded that and said we are going to cut emissions by 32%, which is one of the countries which upscaled and said that we are going a little bit further than what we had committed before. Based on that, for us to be able to ensure that we have the 32% cut on emissions, there must be financing. And the UNFCCC, which is the body tasked with issues of climate change, have specified that they require $100 billion every year if we are going to remain at 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now, based on that being the background, coming home, we need to figure out what is it exactly we need to do to achieve the objectives that the government have already committed to, but also to ensure that we have, a better planet and we are safeguarding the future of our generations.
If I may ask, Daktari, if you look at the emissions that come out of Kenya as a contribution to the deadly emissions that the rest of the world produces, what percentage would you say is our share?
Well, I must say it's minimal, but also I'm very quick to say that, climate change is not a country-based problem. This is a global problem, and irrespective of how much you are emitting, obviously the people who are emitting more affect you. And if you can be able to take it as a duty and responsibility, for instance, as a country, and figure out how, even if you are, emitting very little, you can be able to leverage on what others have done before and to cut on emissions, that would be good news. And I think this is exactly the same trajectory that most countries, if not all countries in our continent, are taking, as opposed to assuming that this is our time to pollute, this is our time to eat. You remember that book sometimes back where they were saying this is our time now to emit. And indeed, what we have seen is that countries are becoming more responsible.
You know why I asked the question, Daktari, is because if what other countries do affect us, and I laud the statement that you've made with reference to us doing our bit, but then does it not follow that what they do in terms of the negative impact of our environment will affect us whether we do our bit or not.
It will, but I'm also quick to say that, there is concerted effort globally. U.S. just the other day with Biden, they came back to the to the Paris Agreement, and this is a good signal because each and every country in the world is trying to push their own way on how they can mitigate and adapt to this challenge. And I tell you, we talk about COVID, we talk about COVID pandemic, but I think this is the biggest pandemic that is facing us, only that it takes a bit of time to happen. And therefore, that's why, for sure, this argument of that it is our time, others are polluting, let's also do this, I think that is already overtaken by events.
Dr. Mungai, is it possible for countries in the global south, for example, is it possible for countries to develop while also taking all this climate change and environmental protection into consideration? Because just coming off of what you've just said, that's the question. It's not that countries are saying it's our time to also pollute, but it is our time to develop and manufacture. Is there a nexus that can be found between the two where you can create a balance? Because countries want to develop who did not have an opportunity to do so 50 years ago.
That's right, and the contrary is also true. And in fact, if you don't, what you're referring to is what you call business as usual kind of, model. But we must move away from that, and we say it's business unusual. Let me just give you some statistics here. Kenyan economy is about $100 billion in terms of the GDP. Now, if we continue in the trajectory and climate change is really causing about between 2 to 3% of the GDP is lost to climate change every year. We are talking about $2-3 billion being lost out of climate change. Apparently, that is exactly the same amount of money that we have mapped out that is coming to the country every year. So that tells you that if this money is not, basically we are replacing the GDP which is being lost by climate change. We need to do better. And that raises the question of how much then do we need to put as far as climate change is concerned. It's between $7 and $10 billion every year that we need to put in. And truly, we cannot develop without taking care of climate change. As you can see, it is cutting out about 2-3% of our GDP on a yearly basis.
So now you talk about then Kenya being part of this agreement to cut by 32%, right? Am I right? What you had said before.
Different countries have committed different things. Kenya have committed 32%. Before we had committed about 30%. We increased it by 2%. And that's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
2%, it's a big deal, yes.
From what you see now in terms of agreements then between government and, of Kenya and other global partners and countries, has Kenya achieved the 32 or is it a work in progress?
This is obviously a work in progress, and the target is actually to 2030.
Okay.
So it's a progress, it's trajectory that by 2030 we want to have, reduced emissions by about 32%. But at the same time, obviously, and I like you say that international partners are part of the game. Private sector is also part of the game. Public sector is also part of the game. And clearly the report shows us where this money is coming from.
So where is the money coming from? And in what form? And where is it going?
Well, we do have, what we have mapped out is about $2.4, billion of cash coming through. Out of that, about $1 billion is coming from the private sector, which is very commendable in that sense. About 1.4 is coming from public sources. And public sources here, about 30% of it is coming locally. About the other 20% or 55% is coming from international sources. When you talk about international sources, just using my organization as an example, where we have been a beneficiary of about 5 billion shillings to fight climate change. This is obviously coming from Danish government, is coming from the European Union, and the way we use that money is really to help, businesses and small and medium enterprises, for that matter, to think climate change and to look at climate change as an opportunity by providing them, concessionary financing, helping them with research, helping them with business advisory. But at the same time also providing the private sector with consultancy services that then would help them to unlock the financing that is coming. Because truly, as you can see those numbers, there is quite a bit of money which is coming through.
So this is money that's coming from external sources?
Well, as I said, it's twofold. So when I say twofold, and let me first the private sector. The money for private sector is about $1 billion. That $1 billion, 60% of it is coming from international organizations, meaning international companies. You may talk about Unilever, you may talk about Vodafone, you may talk about, things like Lake Turkana Wind Power, which is funded by FMO and different people. But then there's also another 40% which is coming from local companies. And local companies here, I mean, it's what KCB is, what Safaricom is, what even small and medium enterprises like Maize Foods from Eldoret, Ofgen from Nairobi, what they are doing. All this is what now accounts for about another 40% of that. But when you look at the public sector again, it's about $1.4 billion. About 70 or 45% of that is coming from local sources. Meaning money from Kenya, but the other difference is coming from international sources. And truly, Eric, what these numbers are saying is that, it's hope. There is hope, but I'm quick to note that we require between $7 to $10 billion. We only have $2 billion. So there is still a gap, about 3-4 times gap, that we need, to leverage and to capitalize so that the money can help us.
This is a huge gap. With a 2.4 billion, before I ask you what the gap would look like, with a 2.4 billion, what kind of impact have you seen?
Well, I mean, look at some of the projects that, for instance, have been done in our continent. Well, not even continent, in Kenya. Lake Turkana Wind Power, 320 megawatts project of wind. Look at what Kenyan is doing. Look at what, like, company I was telling you called Maize Food is doing, which is really working with farmers who are making chili for export. And they have been able to attract, some money in terms of climate financing. Look at what, KCB is doing now with GCF, Global Climate Fund. They have been able to get $150 million for that. So this is the kind of, trajectory that we are seeing within the sectors.
Would you say that countries that are financing these activities, I think, having contributed, this is a statement I'm making, having contributed significantly to the harm that we are referring to, understand it better than most of us. And because of that, they are eager to ensure that it doesn't go beyond the boundary that it has already gone to. Would I be making a fair statement? Well,
to some extent, I must say that it might be the statement in the sense that, of course, the pre-industrial development and, that revolution, that was all about emissions, and we didn't catch up with that. So now we are in a place where we want to develop, but remember also there are people who gone through that phase. They come up with innovations that are helping them, obviously, to mitigate and reduce emissions. And I think our job at this point, and where this money is coming, is also to help us, to piggyback on some of the technologies that they've been working, because also they have realized, yes, it's a disaster, and it's not only a disaster for us, it's for everybody. And that's why developed and developing countries must tag into this game, and we play the game together.
It's a catch-22 situation, because then which country are we going to say would be willing to halt the development plans? Because anytime you talk about development, you are talking about energy consumption. And it's this consumption of energy that brings about this situation that we are now engaged in discussing. So the question is, how do we continue with our development problem? How do we consume energy or produce energy that we can consume and yet ensure that we don't add to the problem that we already have? I believe that is the debate that we're having now. Is that not it?
Yeah, and Muga, the word is not, the word that I want to use here is mainstreaming. So that we need to mainstream climate change, we may need to mainstream sustainable development, sustainability within development. And what that means is that, for instance, when I apply, and you started this debate, Muga, when I go to Kenya Commercial Bank and I want to apply for a loan to, build a set of apartments, the first question they should be able to ask me is that, how well are you taking care of social issues? How well are you taking care of environmental issues? And if then and they are pushing me, to put mechanisms that I can be able to take care of the environment. And I think this is the mainstreaming that we require. And it is known globally that development can be combined with green growth, and this can be able to bring even more sustainable development than what I was calling business as usual before.
Can you paint a practical picture for us? Because people we hear climate change, we hear environmental protection and things like this. And for a lot of people, the first thing that pops into the mind is, all right, so Kenya needs to plant a bunch of trees over the next 10 years. But what else? What are we really looking at when it comes to getting a change in the climate that is essentially going to protect the environment? What exactly are we looking at?
Yeah, and it's kind of start with the individuals. Let me start from the individual perspective. It's the way we are consuming and the way we are producing. It's amount of, the food that we are wasting. It's amount of water that we are wasting. It's amount of energy that we are using at home. Can we be able to change that and to make it more efficient, to make it more effective, and to be more sustainable? When it comes to about companies that you are talking about, it's not only about planting trees. It's also or growing trees for that matter. It's also for companies to start thinking of replacing their energy sources with renewable energy sources. It's how they handle waste. Is how they are using resources and materials within the sector. For instance, East African breweries, for that matter. How much water are they using to make alcohol, to make beer? How efficient are they? Water is not, is a scarce resource, and they must be able to respect it. So these are some of the narratives that need to be put onto place, and hopefully companies, individuals, and government also have a role in terms of providing that enabling environment through policies and standards. And I must say they've done their part, but we still need to plug in this gap that we are talking about.
How can government be directly involved? I mean, I'm thinking about some of the campaigns just within this that we see coming out from other countries, and then there's messaging that is audience specific, that is targeted to the people. For conservation of water, for example, we see these. Do you think those are messages that kind of messaging can work here, whereby you're asking people to conserve something that sometimes they don't see? And so when they see it, they're going to use it. I'm thinking about people who don't have access to clean water on a daily basis. And this is the messaging that then essentially would come to government, and they're saying, well, we're trying to conserve this resource, which we hardly see. Do you think such messaging then would resonate?
Yeah, indeed, one of the biggest challenges that we have seen over time, there are three components. One is about the policy framework, the other one is about financing, and the third challenge that is the awareness creation. And what you are touching on is on awareness creation. We must be able to preach the gospel that we must be able to change the way, again, we consume and produce things, both from individual, from country, and from companies level. And that message must be championed, because the moment we tell people the consequences and we tell them in a language that they can be able to understand, that's how we can be able to get traction. The financing and the policy side of things, those somehow we have the control. But when it comes to awareness creation, we have to roll our sleeves. We have to go deep and be able to tell, Kenyans, including the Wanjiko in the grassroots, what are the effects of climate change? What can they be able to do? It's not only about planting trees, it's also about many other things. And that messaging is what, for instance, as an organization, as KCIC, we've been trying to spread that gospel, at the same time trying to help and show that there is actually hope, and also showing people how it can be done.
For those who would like to see this report, where can they get it?
Well, the report is available also on our website. It's also available on Climate Policy Initiative website, and also from the government, from the Ministry of Finance, is also available from there, because this was a collaboration also with the Ministry of Finance.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Mungai, for speaking to us today. We hope to engage with you again soon.
Thank you, and all the best, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.